All right, welcome back, chat, to another reaction, especially another FNAF reaction. I'm loving that we're getting back to the reactions. I personally enjoy them. I think they're a fun, chill time. Am I a little biased because it's FNAF related, and I'm someone who has been attached to the series and feels like I'll always be attached to this series? Maybe it's a little bit biased, but apparently, as you can see by the title, the biggest FNAF debate is about to end with this theory. Now, I have no idea what that means. I have no idea what the biggest FNAF debate is because me personally, I have a few ideas of what I would consider to be pretty big FNAF debates. Off the top of my head, what is in the FNAF 4 bots? What was that? What was supposed to be in the bots? Because there's a running theory out there that the contents of the FNAF 4 bots has changed at least 3-4 times. So what was originally supposed to be in the bots and what has changed each time, where it's like, oh, this is now supposed to be in the bots and everything. Other big debates out there. I would say another small one, give or take, but it seems like it's pretty hot topic out there. Is Glitch Trap from FNAF VR Help Wanted 1 and 2, specifically 1, is it the Mimic? Is it part of the Helpy AR Vanny network that we learn in Ruin? That's another debate out there. What is FNAF 4 as a whole? What does it mean? That's another pretty debate out there. So yeah, a ton of pretty big debates. Are the books canon? Are they not canon? Right? Are they part of a multiverse? All right. So there's a ton of debates, big questions out there. So I have no idea what this biggest debate is about to end, but you know what? You have me intrigued by the title. I don't know if it's clickbait, but you had me intrigued, so I'm ready to see what this whole debate is about to end, because if I can be convinced about this debate, lovely. So, without further ado, 3, 2, 1, and go.
Throughout the history of FNAF, there's been many different debates, with one of the most popular being
Was that the bite of 87?
the Bite of 87 versus 83 debate. This debate got super ugly, and people argued for months about this, until Scott decided to step in and clarify things in the next game, officially deeming this the Bite of 83. It's been nearly a decade since that debate occurred, and I regret to inform you that history is repeating itself. A portion of the community has been on fire for the past year and a half, and just like in 2015, we're about to get a game that might just clear it all up.
So, recap. The reason why there was such a big debate of why that 8-bit minigame from FNAF 4, of why so many thought that was the Bite of 87. Brief history lesson. Ever since we heard the Bite of 87, where the animatronics are no longer allowed to roam around freely in the restaurants, the animatronics were on lockdown mode. When the animatronic bit somebody in 1987, that's what we learned about since the first game, the first night in the tapes. And up until that point in the series, that was the first on-screen death where we've seen someone get bitten. So logically, as the fan base, ever since we've heard about the Bite of 87 being this big deal and everything, and we see someone get bit in a game, we're like, oh, that has to be the Bite of 87, because that's just the moment, that's the big event that we've been told about since the very beginning. And turns out, it was wrong. It was not the Bite of 87. And Scott confirmed that by going to sister location, where you get the secret entered room in night 5, where you type in the keypad 1983, because Scott said in a Steam post where sometimes my clarifications aren't clear in the beginning, so he makes it a point in the next game to clarify something. And he said in FNAF 4, he clarified a misconception in sister location. That misconception being, when does the game take place? And he did that by having us enter 1983 in the keypad for the FNAF 4 cameras. So, brief history lesson, but we move. I'm sure that means absolutely nothing in this video, but I just want to add context for the introduction of why that debate was so hot topic way back when.
That game is The Secret of the Mimic. Let me explain. Back in December of 2021, after years of waiting, we finally got Five Nights at Freddy's Security Breach. This was the biggest FNAF game we've ever gotten, and with it came a bunch of new lore. That lore, though, was quickly proven to be borderline impossible to solve. Back in 2022, I came to the conclusion that it felt like Security Breach was trying to tell two versions of a story. And nearly 3 years after the game's release, Scott revealed that this actually was the case.
Oh, 1,000%. And I do not think that is a hot topic, and I feel like that's commonly accepted in the community. And that is why Security Breach was so hated on release, and why it was so broken. There were so many bugs, there were so many game-breaking glitches, nothing made sense. You know, you watch the trailer of Security Breach, and you hear lines of like, Monty is supposed to be an antagonist, and it's supposed to be a pretty limited threat throughout the entire game. Vanny, who was hyped out to be the next killer and take up the mantle of William Afton's no longer the villain in the story. It's now Vanessa, it's now Vanny, now their story and everything. But as you know, when the game came out, Vanny was pushed to the sideline because it's now Afton's back and everything, because he always comes back. So 1,000%, a ton of things changed in Security Breach, and that's why it was so rushed, it was so broken, without a doubt. Now, I would say, I know it's a common theory out there that one of the reasons why Security Breach came out so rushed and the story clearly changed from the trailers being released to the game we got. I know a common theory out there is MatPat's theories, game theories, the game theorist, MatPat. He theorized a lot of stuff in Security Breach from the trailers and everything, and the theory goes that he predicted a lot of the twists that we would see and we would play in the game. So Steel Wool came behind the scenes, changed a lot of stuff from what they had originally planned because it was predicted in MatPat's theories, to change a lot of stuff up because they did not want to all be predicted right when we got the release. So that's why the game felt very messy, very convoluted, and nothing added up. There's a lot of dots not connected whatsoever because the story changed multiple times over, right? But similar to the intro, talking about the 1983 versus 1987 timeline, that theory and all those ideas about the game being rushed, the story being changed, everything, that has been hammered to the ground. I'm just saying that just to add context, but no, 100%. I am a firm believer that, yes, as someone who has played Security Breach on stream and everything about a year and a half ago, which is crazy to think about, and yes, the game is not as broken as it was on launch and everything, which is kind of nice. I am a firm believer in that the story 1,000% changed from what they originally planned to what we actually got 1,000%.
I had a very specific story in mind, and it is very different than the one that got in the game. And I think a part of that is the way that I conveyed that to Steel Wool. I was trying to tell Steel Wool to put specific items in specific places, have specific characters do certain things, meanwhile not telling them what the story plot was. That didn't work out very well because they got all of these pieces and they thought it was their job to connect them in a way that made sense. And so really what you ended up having were the same pieces, but telling completely different stories.
Scott.
I also, another point about that, Scott and everything, another reason why Security Breach failed and didn't work too well, not only did they change the story and everything, and that was fun, but you also have to remember, Security Breach got delayed, 3 or 4 times? it was supposed to come out in 2020, but lo and behold, who could have predicted the pandemic was going to happen? And then it got delayed to 2021, and then it got delayed again, and then it was like early 2021, late 2021, and then it was supposed to come out like December something of 2022. And instead of having a midnight release, 11:59 midnight release, like how most games are, instead it was like 9:10 p.m. that night. So Steelwool Lily was working to the minute up until the game released. And no surprise, it came out broken. So the game also being delayed several times also did not help its case. Changing stories and countless delays, it was a recipe for disaster. But I will deny the amount of hype that I and the entire FNAF community had for Security Breach will never get lost to me. Security Breach had a ton of hype, regardless of how the game came out, especially on launch.
Only gave Steelwool pieces of the story he was trying to tell. Because of this, Security Breach contained two different stories. Steelwool's story and the pieces of Scott's story left throughout the game. About a year after the game came out, these pieces that Scott gave to Steelwool actually started revealing themselves with the release of the Tales from the Pizzaplex books. The first piece was revealed in March of 2023 when the fifth Tales from the Pizzaplex book came out. In this book, we got a story called GGY, where Gregory was revealed to be a very skilled hacker who was able to give himself an absurdly high score on the arcade machines throughout the Pizzaplex. And little did
AKA, Gregory is a robot.
we know in the games, on the arcade machines throughout the Pizzaplex, you can see GGY at the top of the leaderboards. It was this story that really made it clear that Scott was using these books to point us in the right direction. And a huge thing that those books introduced us to was the Mimic. In the Tales books, we literally got a whole story outlining the
Sup, Dakota? Welcome in. I was surprised that you're at the stream and everything, because I know that FNAF isn't your thing and everything, and we're reacting to a FNAF theory, but you know what? Respect to you for being here. Appreciate it.
origins of the Mimic, including who built it, where it was built, and why it was built. The books gave us all of this stuff before Ruin even came out and revealed the Mimic as the big twist villain. The Mimic first being introduced in the books and then being put into the games really made the debate heat up. That debate being, does 100% of what happens in the Tales books also happen in the games?
I've talked about this on a previous reaction. It feels like a couple months ago. This whole thing about, are the books canon, right? And like, how do people think about it? How do people, when it comes to timelines, what's real, what's not? Are the books a separate universe, its own continuity? Does it fit in the FNAF world? Is it a separate thing? Are the books more canon than the games? Right? I know there's a lot of debate out there, which is crazy, because I remember when the first trilogy of books came out. It was between FNAF 4 and Sister Location, the original trilogy of books. And I remember when the books came out, they were ridiculed, they were bullied, they were hated, because like, there is no way these books are canon. They are changing everything we know about the FNAF universe. So to go from people separating off, saying the books are not canon, and bullying them out of existence, to now people rely so much on the books to the point where if it is in the book, it has to be canon, is quite the 180. But I've always had the thought, I've always worked the mindset that the books can be canon. The games can also be canon. But I've had the mindset that the books can present interesting ideas or make us look at what we see in the games in a different perspective, a different light, right? Doesn't mean exactly what we see in the books is canon, but the idea of what happens in the books can be like, does that happen in the games? Like, For instance, I brought up on the previous reaction video that I'm talking about when I talk about if the books are canon or not. In the original trilogy of books, there is a waterfall under the pizzeria with glowing mushrooms. And that was one of the hideouts that William Afton hid in to kill and kidnap kids. Right? Very oddly specific. And in Ruin, Cassie goes under the FNAF Sits pizzeria, and then underneath that is a waterfall with glowing mushrooms. And underneath that is where we see the mimic. Right? Once again, kind of a connection, very oddly specific. And then on the flip side, you have other things that happen in the books that you don't see in the games, but they present interesting ideas. They add context where, like, maybe that is what the games were intending to be. Like, for instance, I'm trying to think. Oh, yeah. And FNAF 4, the Fun with Plush Trap minigame where you're sitting in the hallway with Plush Trap sitting in the chair, and it's all about the game of listening where you hear his footsteps, recline on the carpet. You shine the flashlight to make him stop moving. Well, in one of the Tales of the Pizzaplets, or Fazbear Frights, they mix it up and everything. There's so many books, all right? There's like 50 books. But in one of the Fazbear Frights books, there is a plush trap with human eyes and human teeth, and it is able to bite through metal, is able to bite through anything it comes in contact with. And it only stops when you shine a light at it. Right? So we've never seen, plush trap bite through doors or whatever like we see in the books, but a plush trap that bites things and is stopped in a light, the comparison is pretty, 1-to-1. Let's see, then I'm trying to think of what other ones are there. And similar to, I guess, the reaction video we did earlier, where we were talking about Psychic Friend Fredbear in his final speech with the crying child on his deathbed and everything, where it's like, the lines of, we're still your friends. Do you still believe that? I will put you back together, the iconic line and everything. And connecting that to another one of the Fazbear Fights books, where it's a kid in the hospital with his plush stuffed animal with a walkie-talkie, and he's talking the walkie-talkie with like his friend and everything. But on the other side of the walkie-talkie is his dad, who is in the military. So it is allowing the dad to keep an eye on his dad, his son, and his dad to keep on his dad, his dad to keep on his son and everything. And I paint the picture of maybe that's why in that final night of those, weird lines and everything of Second Friend Fredbear, is kind of talking a little bit differently, and why his text is also a different shade of yellow. I paint the connection that's telling people that is possibly William Afton using the Psychic Friend Fredbear plush that clearly the FNAF 4 crying child carries around nonstop, right? Using the Psychic Friend Fredbear plush, which we know is a surveillance camera and has a walkie-talkie inside, right? Using that to talk to the kid and say, I will put back together. We're still your friends. Talking as if he is the Psychic Friend Fredbear plush, right? This has never been confirmed or anything, so I'll make that clear. But it's an interesting thought that the book is kind of leaning towards, where it kind of points you in the direction of, does that happen in the games? It makes you think twice about something. returns from his Twitch hiatus. Thoughts on the beard? I mean, first of all, Twitch hiatus? I feel like I've been pretty active on Twitch. I mean, we're now in day 2 of reacting to something in a row, so I mean, that's a little bit of a streak. We did a couple of streams over the weekend, especially with the whole Luka Doncic dumb trade. And second part, thoughts on the beer and everything. You know, it's coming together. We've had it growing for about a month and a half now. So we'll see. We'll see if we keep it. Ultimately, I just want to see if I'm someone who, with my facial structure and everything, can I rock a beard? It's always been a question I've had since I shave every day or anything. I'm like, you know what? I'm willing to test fate because I'm someone who's very experimental. I want to see. You know what? I want to see if I'm someone who can pull off a beard. Because if I can't, hey, at least I gave it the old college try. So it's interesting. We'll see.
Does the Mimic have the exact same backstory in the games as it does in the books? Let's talk about it. The biggest question for me that will hopefully be answered in Secret of the Mimic is who actually built the Mimic in the games? Well, I believe there are 4 possible ways it could go. It could either be Edwin, the man who built the Mimic in the books, Henry, William Afton, or finally some new character that Scott and Steelwool came up with.
Edwin, Henry, William, and question mark. Interesting. It's interesting because people are already paying the connection that Edwin is a stand-in for Henry because we know in the games Henry is a genius inventor of animatronics and his child, Charlie Charlotte, dies at a young age. Right? Dies at a young age. So then he attempts to put his child back together in robot form. That's where the fourth closet, the 4 closets come in, is because Charlie Charlotte has multiple stages of life, multiple robots for each stage of life, where there's then baby infant form, a child form, a teen adult form. Those are the 4 closets, different stages of Charlie Charlotte as robots, right? So that's Henry. Edwin is also a genius inventor of animatronics. He also has a kid who dies at a young age, and he also, just like Henry, tries to... let me rephrase. So, Henry, the 4th and final Charlie Charlotte bought for Henry in the 4 closets. Henry is stricken by grief, agony, hatred. He hates how much that his child is now dead, right? So, as he's putting the 4th Charlie Charlotte bot together and everything, he's beating on it because, once again, he's so struck with grief over his child dying. Edwin, in the books, the mimic robot that he creates to keep his son occupied and everything is a mimic, because the robot was created to be like his child's best friend and everything, where literally is a mimic. He mimics everything that Edwin's son does and everything. So when Edwin's son died, the robot, the mimic, would still mimic and recreate everything that Edwin's son did. So because of that, because the robot, the mimic, is reminding Edwin of what his son used to be like, he also, beat the robot to a pulp and everything, because just like Henry, he was so struck with grief over his child dying and everything. So people are already paying the connection that Edwin and Henry are meant to be together. It's the book stand-in for Henry. So it's interesting you separate them.
Unless something extremely unexpected happens, I think these are the only 4 possible options. Why? Well, let's start with Henry. If you've watched any of my theories from the past year and a half, you know that I've believed that Henry is the one who built the Mimic in the games. A big reason for this was because the Mimic story in the books is very similar to Henry's story in the Silver Eyes trilogy. A dad who builds a robot that mimics his kid. After his kid dies, the dad beats up the robot in a fit of grief and rage. After beating up the robot then becomes the main antagonist of the whole series. After doing more research though, I found that the connections don't stop there. Let's look at the context of how we find the Mimic in Ruin. After shutting down all of the Bonnie-shaped security nodes, Cassie enters the area where the Mimic is being hidden. This area consists of a cave with glowing mushrooms, a waterfall, and a room with carnival-themed mascot costumes. After shutting down Mexes and freeing the Mimic, Gregory reveals that the Mimic has been trapped down there for, quote, a really long time.
I don't know what it is, but it's been trapped down here a really long time.
This means that a very long time ago, someone captured the Mimic and wanted to keep it hidden underground, going as far as to build mexes to help keep it from escaping.
I know there's theories out there when it comes to the really long time part, the Mimic, there are theories out there that the Mimic software is one of the first pieces of technology animatronic form in the entire series, right? It's like the Mimic software, the Sun and Moon animatronics from the daycare. It seems like those 3 are like some of the earliest creations in the entire series.
Now let me point you towards what happens in the Silver Eyes trilogy. In the last book, it's revealed that Henry was able to capture the robot he built and keep it hidden underground. This area where he kept the robot hidden consisted of a cave with glowing mushrooms, a waterfall, and a room with carnival-themed mascot costumes. This is literally exactly what we see in Ruin. I think these connections are valid to make, but even with all of these connections, you could make a very valid rebuttal. Just because the Tales books in Ruin are telling a similar story to Henry in the Silver Eyes doesn't mean Henry has to assume the same role in both.
Interesting. I'm curious.
A different character could have easily built the Mimic in the games and just had a very similar storyline to Henry.
They could. Right. They could. You're not wrong. They could be not Henry. It could entirely be someone who's different. Because, yeah, indeed, it's never been confirmed. People just run with the theory that Henry's backstory, creating animatronics, a robot Mimic software, and Edwin in the books is also a dad who's struck with grief, makes a robot, slash Mimic, after being struck with grief after their child dies or everything. It's never been confirmed that, yes, Edwin is Henry, but the connections are just way too similar. That's just asking people to make the connection. Because if it comes out that Henry and Edwin are never the same person, then my main question is, like everyone else, then what was the point of having Henry and Edwin's backstory be pretty much one-to-one? The only difference is their name, right? Right? That's the only thing. Because I'm pretty sure even in the books, Edwin is described as someone who has, just like Henry in the picture, brown hair and a beard. So you're just asking people to make the connection. So for it to finally come out and say, yeah, Henry and Edwin are different, it's like, well then, why did you make all these deliberate comparisons of them being similar?
I think that's an extremely valid rebuttal. But here's why I think Henry building the Mimic would make logical and narrative sense. When Steelwool and Scott were making Ruin, they were faced with a choice. They knew the Mimic was going to be the big reveal at the end, but the choice lies in where they wanted the Mimic to be found. They could have put the Mimic anywhere, but they ultimately decided to put the Mimic under the FNAF 6 pizzeria. And when we visit this pizzeria in Security Breach, we get to see the actual labyrinth that Henry used to burn all of the animatronics mimics in FNAF 6. Where we find the mimic, though, is directly under this labyrinth. Not only that, the door we go through to get to the mimic is literally inside Henry's labyrinth. Judging by the extremely old and worn away staircase, it doesn't look like this door was a new addition either. This staircase is old, and it turns out that Mex's is old too. A lot of people have speculated that Gregory and Vanessa must have built the Mex's machine after the events of Security Breach, but recently we got new information that might have disproved that theory. In my interview with J-Top from Steelwool Studios, he revealed that the Mex's machine was specifically designed to look old, and that it's not a new machine.
That is deliberately supposed to be an older machine. So
Okay.
the Whopper being like a good example of like, hey, here's a supercomputer.
But it's old.
Before computers are like this big. The model just is not a modern computer.
No, it's not. It's
Right.
very old.
I mean, just like not only that, with the Nexus machine and everything, but the computer you use to shut down the software and everything, that's the software. It's like some very old PC from like the 60s or 70s, right? One of the brick computers as well.
Looks old.
The Mex's machine was
Yeah, if you can see right here on the left, not sure if my mouse cursor's picking up on it. To the left of the machine, everything, that white block PC and everything, I want to say that was a popular PC from like the 60s or 70s, which goes to the point of, yeah, this is supposed to look old.
specifically designed to look like an old supercomputer from the early 80s. And if it really was made all the way back then, Gregory and Vanessa couldn't have been the ones to build it. It must have been someone from decades ago who knew about the mimic and deliberately wanted to keep it hidden. And judging by the location of the door to get to Mex's, I think the person who built it and wanted to keep the mimic hidden all those years ago was Henry. This to me makes somewhat logical sense. But how can it make narrative sense? If Henry really did build Mex's and kept the mimic hidden underground for all of this time, why is this the first time we're hearing about it? And how is Mex's, a machine built in the early 80s, so connected to the Pizzaplex, which was built way in the future? Well, if Mex's really was built in the early 80s, someone in the modern day must have actively connected Mex's to the Pizzaplex. We know that Henry dies way before the Pizzaplex is even built, so someone at the Pizzaplex must have taken on the mantle of keeping the mimic buried underground. And this may be hard to believe, but this is exactly what happens in the Silver Eyes trilogy. In the Silver Eyes trilogy, Henry ends up taking his own life because of the overwhelming grief of losing his daughter. But before he does, he leaves a note behind for his sister Jenny. In this note, he tells her about the robot he built and how he was able to capture it and keep it hidden underground, in what he deems as the fourth closet. Quote, "My only lasting instruction for you concerns the fourth closet. It is not enough to keep it shut. You must keep that one sealed and buried. I was able to seal it away, and you, Jenny, must ensure that the seal remains." Henry passed the torch to someone else, now having them make sure that what he hid underground stays hidden. And I think this also could have happened in the games. The reason Mex's, a machine from the early 80s, is linked directly to the modern day Pizzaplex is because someone carried on the duties of making sure the mimic stayed hidden after Henry died in FNAF 6. And I think we know who this person is. We know it has to be someone who has access to a Vanny mask so they can set up the security nodes throughout the mall. Someone who's a technician or is smart enough to know how to use Mex's and set up the nodes. And we know it has to be someone who would do anything to make sure the mimic stays hidden. If you haven't picked up on it already, all signs are pointing to this person being Cassie's dad.
Huh, so there's the twist. I am assuming. A Fazbear technician, which we know that's Cassie's dad's role. A Fazbear technician that we don't know if he died, disappeared, or both. The only thing we can assume is during an ending, which I'm assuming is the bad ending, because at least that's how it's played out. Cassie's dad gets abducted by nightmare staff robots, because you see the charging pod, burn trap, glitch trap, open everything, and then next thing you're taken to is in the beginning of Ruin, where you were handing the Vanny mask to Cassie, but you are her father handing the Vanessa evil Vanny mask to your daughter for her to later be mind controlled by the Vanny network. So, him being linked to keeping the mimic down there just for your daughter to get tricked and undo all that work. Interesting.
If Cassie's dad was the one trusted to continue keeping the mimic hidden, suddenly everything starts making sense. Cassie's dad is a Fazbear technician and would be smart enough to know how to use mexes.
It's just like my dad's.
Cassie's dad also has access to a Vanny mask, something that surprised all of us in Help Wanted 2. This would also explain why the security nodes and mexes resemble Bonnie. Bonnie was Cassie's dad's favorite character. But if you aren't convinced that Cassie's dad is the one who set up the mexes security nodes yet, here's the ultimate need more proof. In Ruin, there's only one security node that's not like the rest. Roxy, the final security node. When the trailer for Ruin came out, we were all confused because Roxy looked different, almost like she was wearing a mask. And in Ruin, we used that mask to deactivate the final node, Roxy. Then, in Help Wanted 2, we learned that the mask didn't just magically appear on Roxy, someone put it there. That someone is Cassie's dad, the person we play as in Help Wanted 2. Cassie's dad put that mask on Roxy, turning her into a walking security node. We also know that Cassie's dad would literally do anything to make sure the mimic stays hidden. In Security Breach, we learned that Vanessa, under the control of the mimic virus, used Glamrock Freddy to clear a path to where the mimic was hiding.
She brought me here. I found myself for the first time when I cleared the path.
But in the canon ending of Security Breach,
Do we even know what the canon of Security Breach is? Right? Because it seems like to this day, that's another big debate, big mystery that we still need to solve. What is the ending of Security Breach? Because you have the Princess Quest ending, which is the only 3-star ending in Security Breach. It's also in Ruin. You get comic page drawings of all the endings in Security Breach, and the descriptions like, Gregory was such a great artist. He was always so creative. Basically having the implication that all these endings that you see in Security Breach were made up in Gregory's mind just for fun, because once again, he was creative. The only one you don't get a comic page for in Ruin is this, the Princess Quest ending, the 3-star ending, which leads people to believe that it's canon. You also take the head of Freddy with you, which would also explain why in Ruin, the Freddy you see is missing his head and everything, right? And it also explains why the Vanny mask is left on the ground and why you pick it up later on in the beginning of Ruin. So all those pieces connect of why Princess Quest is the definitive canon ending in Ruin. But people also assume the Burn Trap Afton ending, Blob ending, whatever you want to call it, you know what I'm talking about. The one full ending that is animated leads people to believe, no, that is the ending. Where the entire Pizza Plutz caves in because of the Blob and Afton. That has to be the canon ending. Because Afton's back. Because he always does. And then it would also explain why, in the beginning of Ruin, why this Pizza Plutz is in, well, Ruin. It's a wreck. And that's why the earthquake that shut down the Pizza Plutz and everything is, once again, just Fazbear Entertainment covering up loose ends, saying, oh, it was totally an earthquake that shut the doors of the Pizza Place and is now in ruin. Not a undead corpse zombie coming out of his birthing pod next to a blob of tangle of wires, different animatronics. No, that can't be the reason why the entire Pizza Place implodes on itself. No, it was definitely an earthquake.
Gregory frees Vanessa from the virus. After being freed, Gregory and Vanessa both go down to re-trap the Mimic underground. This is why we can find Gregory's backpack in the Mimic's lair in ruin, next to a vent filled with concrete. We also know that Cassie's dad catches wind of what happens and drops everything to make sure the Mimic doesn't escape. This leads us to the note we find in ruin from Cassie's dad. Quote, "Gone for a while. Money for food on counter, emergency contacts on fridge." Making sure the Mimic doesn't escape was so important to him that he was willing to leave his daughter behind to get it done. So Cassie's dad left that note for Cassie, grabbed his Vanny mask, and went to the Pizzaplex. There, I think he took his Vanny mask and created all of the Bonnie-shaped security nodes and connected the now Bonnie-shaped mexes directly to the Pizzaplex, even locking the doors behind him to make sure no one can get to the Mimic. After making sure the physical Mimic can't escape, he makes his way to the FNAF 6 pizzeria, where he uses that same Vanny mask to destroy what's left of the Mimic virus. Need more proof?
I will say I do kind of like this interpretation, this theory, that the whole Nexus taking the incarnation of a Bonnie, it does make more sense of it to be connected to Cassie's dad instead of it being, well, the only other person who's connected to bunnies, which is William Afton, right? Because the reason why Nexus being connected to William Afton never made sense to me is why would Nexus and William Afton be connected? Because what we now know is Nexus is not a villain, not a bad character. Like, he is actively trying to stop you to remove the security nodes, unlock the Mimic's prison so it can escape and everything. It's actively stopping you from releasing the Mimic. So why would William Afton want you to stop doing that? That doesn't make any sense. But if it's Cassie's dad who locked the Mimic away, yeah, that makes sense of why he's trying to stop you from, unlocking it.
Well, I present the entire plot of Help Wanted 2. In Help Wanted 2, we see Cassie's dad, who made his way through the Pizzaplex and down to the FNAF 6 pizzeria with his Vanny mask, trying to destroy what's left of the Mimic virus. But as we learn in both endings of that game, Cassie's dad never makes it out of the pizzeria. This causes Cassie to then wonder where her missing father went, which then leads to the events of Ruin. Cassie is lured into the Pizzaplex by the Mimic and is tricked into undoing everything her dad set in place. A big question I had while writing this theory was, if Henry really did build the Mimic, why didn't he just burn the Mimic in FNAF 6 with everyone else? If he really wanted to end everything in FNAF 6, why not end the Mimic too?
I'll tell you the answer. I don't know if it's going to be the answer, but I'm going to say it anyway, in case it doesn't need to be said. I'll tell you why the Mimic was not burned, along with Henry, Michael Afton, William Afton, Baby, Molten Freddy, and all those others. Lefty, the puppet. I'll tell you why the Mimic was not burned in that ending. Because fire never works. Right? We see in FNAF 3. We see in FNAF 6. Fire does not work on animatronics. We think it works. They think they get burned. But then they come back because they always do, especially William Afton. So that's the reason. I don't know if you're going to say it, but I'm going to say anyway. The reason why the Mimic was not burned is because fire never works in the series.
Well, I think it's because the Mimic already was burnt, and it didn't work. In Help Wanted 2, and now the Secret of the Mimic trailer, we've been getting hints that there was some kind of big fire associated with the Mimic. Even the Mimic in the Tales books is described as looking extremely burnt. Someone burned this thing years ago, and yet it still lives. So since burning it didn't work, it needed to be buried and locked underground. This is why Henry didn't burn the Mimic in FNAF 6, and instead kept it locked underground direct directly underneath where the FNAF 6 fire took place. As Henry says in FNAF 6,
I have to call them all back, all of them, together in one place.
It turns out everything was together in one place, except some things were buried deeper than others. When we got the title of the new game, Secret of the Mimic, I saw a lot of people have a problem with it, mostly because every title recently has had some sort of double meaning, and this one doesn't seem to have a double meaning, but I think it does. Not only does the Mimic probably inherently hold a few secrets, I think the Mimic is the secret. It's a robot that dates back to the earliest point in the timeline, and whatever happened in 1979 was so bad that it needed to be kept buried and hidden underground for decades. Not only does that make the title make more sense, but from a storytelling perspective, it's a way to explain why this thing from the earliest point in the FNAF timeline hasn't been seen or talked about until now. It's something that's too dangerous to be burned again. It needs to be buried, locked away, and never talked about again. Not only do I think this option for Who Built the Mimic would be very cool to see, I think it would be nice to finally learn more about such an important character that we barely hear any backstory about in the games. But there are other options. I think William Afton is also a very valid option for building the Mimic. The things going for it are that William Afton obviously has some fascination with the circus. He created Circus Baby's Pizza World, making a bunch of circus-themed funtime animatronics. His sister location bunker is filled with a bunch of weird creations, including the Ennard clown mask, which looks similar to Jackie from Secret of the Mimic. Jackie has a line going down the center of her face, which is very much Afton's style with his faceplate designs.
Faceplate designs split down the middle is Afton. Maybe, but I also think it's a one-off thing. Like, I don't think the split down the middle thing is as consistent as, like, Henry, for instance. Because we know Henry animatronics have the split jaw line because of the wire in between. We see that in the Mediocre Melodies. We see that in FNAF 6. Right. Trying to see where else do we see it. Like, animatronics, I think there's another one I'm just forgetting, but I know for a fact FNAF 6 and FNAF 6, I just said it. FNAF 6 and the Mediocre Melodies, the Rockstar animatronics, we know the split jaw line is a Henry creation. So, I like to think it's a one-off thing. He'll split down the middle, as opposed to the split jawline, which clearly is a Henry trademark.
So although personally I think this is the least likely, William Afton could very well also have built the Mimic. But here's where I may shock you. If I had to put money on
Oh boy, here's the shock. What is it?
it right now and commit to one of these possibilities, I wouldn't put money on Henry or William creating the Mimic in the games. I would put money on either a brand new character that Scott and Steelwool came up with, or Edwin from the books being the creator of the Mimic in the games. Here's why. I think it all started with what Scott said in the newest Doco interview. Scott only gave Steelwool pieces of the story he was trying to tell, and after Security Breach didn't go as planned, he was obviously using the Tales books to try and point us in the right direction. In these books, Scott literally gave us an entire origin story for the Mimic, with the Mimic originally being built in an abandoned factory building. Then I went to PAX and I got to play the Secret of the Mimic demo, and it turns out the whole demo takes place in what seems to be a factory building, matching up with what we see in the books. After watching the new Scott interview and playing the demo, I wouldn't be surprised if we get the exact same origin story from the books copy and pasted into the game. I also wouldn't be surprised if Edwin from the books shows up in Secret of the Mimic as the creator of the Mimic. Does this go against literally everything I've said for the past year and a half? Yes, and I think the point of this video is to show you that that's okay. I have gotten boatloads of hate for even suggesting that the story in the games might be different from the story in the books. There's a very passionate group of people who really want me to be wrong when Secret of the Mimic comes out. And yes, it would be very nice to be proven right in Secret of the Mimic. I would actually fall out of my chair if Henry is revealed to be the one who built the Mimic. But I want you to know that I don't make these theories with the expectation that I will be proven right. I make theories because it's fun, and I treat them as almost a time capsule of what I was thinking at that time. Do I still think Baby is the Mimic? No. Do I still think Funtime Freddy used an illusion disc to make himself look like Fredbear in Midnight Motorist? No, but those theories were fun to make, and I hope you had fun watching them. Even though I may disagree with taking the story from the books and copy-pasting it into the games, effectively spoiling the origin story of the Mimic 2 years before the Origins game comes out, I'm totally open to that happening. Does this mean that I believe 100% of what happens in the books also happens in the games? Not yet. There's still some questions that I need answered. For example, if Mexes was made in the early 80s specifically to keep the Mimic trapped under the FNAF 6 pizzeria, and Gregory says the Mimic has been trapped down there for, quote, a really long time, that doesn't really line up with what happens in the books. In the books, the Mimic is shipped to the Pizzaplex while the mall is still being built, and then is trapped in the FNAF 6 pizzeria. So unless the Mimic was trapped under the FNAF 6 pizzeria in the 80s, escaped, and then got re-trapped, we have some problems. And hopefully we'll find out all of those answers in Secret of the Mimic coming out next year.
Cool. That was a lot of closing points. With that, hold on. Can we do this? Let me see if I can switch this up. Yeah. Hold up. If I do that... Hold on, that's a little bit too big. Whoa. Okay. Hey, it's probably the closest I've ever been seen on stream, so hello. So yeah, those are the closing thoughts on the theory and everything. So, closing thoughts on it. Well, first things first, the whole, like, you know, the hate on theories and, you know, these are just, like, fun ideas or anything, 100%. Like, don't attack, don't bully people for their theories of what ideas they have because, once again, at the end of the day, they're just theories. Like, I have my own ideas, I have my own theories of, you know, what I deem as canon, what I deem as my ideal timeline for how I think these events happen, or what I deem as how the story is going. And I abandon certain facts of the FNAF universe because, you know, I'm abandoning this idea because I think this idea is more important, right? Like, for instance, I don't put too much stock in the tapes we hear in FNAF 1, FNAF 2, FNAF 3. Mainly because I think we've gotten a lot more information on the FNAF timeline, the FNAF universe, even though not much has been confirmed. But we definitely have gotten a lot more information of how the universe works compared to back then when all we had to go off of was FNAF 1, FNAF 2, FNAF 3, and it was up to the community then to piece together. There was no movie. There was no 5-6 series of books and everything. So it was a lot harder to find information. The only information we had in the games was those tapes, and that's how we had to put the pieces together of what is canon, what's not, and how does the story piece together and everything. So, yeah, don't attack people with their theories. It's fun at the end of the day. I enjoy hearing people's theories, people's thoughts of what they deem as canon, how they come up with answers to this FNAF theory problem, because let's face it, it's a problem that, you know, is popular, and we're still trying to figure out the answer to this day because, you know, FNAF has been around for over a decade, and we still are trying to find answers to the problem. So, you know, That's why theories and that's why a series is so popular is for these theories. Last thing we want to do is attack people for their theories, for their ideas, because, in my opinion, theories are what's keeping the FNAF universe still alive, still running, still as popular as it is, not the games. I think, in my opinion, it's more interesting to talk about theories for the FNAF games than talk about the games itself, right? And I don't feel like I'm the only one who shares that sentiment, where I think it's more interesting hearing people's ideas for theories rather than hearing people play the games, right? So don't attack people for their theories because, you worry that could get to a point where, nobody makes theories because everyone gets bullied and everything. So that's what we don't want to do. PSA announcement. But I guess closing thoughts on the theory of who made the mimic and everything. It's interesting. But I feel like I shared all my thoughts, all my reactions, my thoughts of the theory while I was, listening to it and everything. I still have the same idea of separating Henry and Edwin. Want to separate it for two separate characters. That doesn't really make sense to me, right? It doesn't really make sense to me because why would you do the separation? Why would you have Henry with all these similarities of someone who's a genius inventor, their child dies at a young age, they are stricken by grief of agony, and their robot creation after the child died is now beaten and bludgeoned, which causes the animatronic to be fused with agony, which is another way for animatronics to get possession life, is agony. And you have the Edwin story, who's, once again, another father who is grieving because the loss of their child, is also beating the living heck out of the robot creation and fusing with agony, right? Like, to me, that's just asking people to paint the connection of Henry being the stand-in for Edwin in the books. They're one-to-one. Because otherwise, why would you have all these details very specifically one-to-one, right? Like, it's not enough to just have a dad who lost their child and everything. It's like, for them to also be struck with the grief and agony and everything, like, that is just oddly specific. That, to me, you're just asking people to paint the connection. Because if it's not, it comes out that Henry and Edwin are meant to be different, then, to me, that's cruel on Scott and Scholastic part. Because why would you do that? Why would you have Henry and Edwin clearly meant to be connected, but nope, turns out they're different? It's like, you could have just made your own character. You could have given Edwin and or Henry complete different backstories, but you didn't. So to me, that's just, you can't get mad for people paying the connection that they are meant to be one-to-one. But interesting thought, interesting theory. Let's see. I think the whole theory of, if it is true that Henry made the mimic and everything, and the second part of Cassie's dad being the one who locked it down there from a very long time and everything, and it's Cassie's undoing her father's steps and everything, I think that's interesting from a narrative perspective. But B, just to close off and everything, I think if this theory comes out to be true, I think we will look back on this theory and it'll be a lot like Dream Theory from the original 4 games. Gregor being a robot after a security breach, where now that's more widely accepted in the community. Like, I think it's going to be one of those theories where it sounds crazy at the time, but after months and years go by, you're like, damn, if you look back on this theory, I think this was pretty close to being accurate.